click the buttons and we should be live now. Just go over to the dashboard and make sure that it's worked properly. There we go, it is live. Welcome to episode 2 of Down Under Politics, where 4 white cis males talk about politics and basically just upset everyone across the entire political spectrum in as many creative ways as possible. I'm Jonathan. We've got Mitchell, David and Tom here tonight as per the usual. We have some very exciting topics to discuss tonight, all the way from Pride Month to French submarines, to house rentals and how landlords are literally Satan, as well as Bruz v Google, which we will go into later for those who don't understand and for those who have already Googled it and are wetting their pants about it already because it's so dumb. So, where do we want to start? I'm happy to start with any of these topics. Where do we want to start?
Let's piss off as many people as possible and go for Pride Month.
Okay, let's start with Pride Month. Look, I did make a little note here. Pride Month can basically be summed up as corporations putting a pride flag over their logo to cover up how they completely screw over the majority of the LGBT community, while also pissing off conservatives to make money somehow. I don't know entirely. Does someone want to start with their opinion on this, and we'll go from there? No takers, I'll volunteer myself then. Basically, as far as I'm concerned, it's all largely just a marketing thing for major corporations. Sure, like having equal rights for people in the LGBTQIA+, I think that's all of it. I'm really bad with this, so I apologise if I missed anyone off of the list. But basically, corporations putting the pride flag over their logo does very little to achieve anything and boost their sales.
So I find this really interesting. One of my best friends, one of his old housemates, actually works in corporate and is a proud gay man and loves the fact that corporations do all of this sort of stuff. And his reasoning is that it's actually a representation of himself and people like him in the companies that he works in. He feels like he has a certain sense of ownership over the company. He feels like the company belongs to him as much as he belongs to the company. The fact that they're taking who he sees himself to be, and they're showing that they like him as a person, that they care, basically.
Yeah. I think but it's purely to, I think that's the thing is, Mitchell, is it's purely to, it probably makes him feel like they like him as a person, but I think it just has an ulterior motive to sell him stuff.
I mean, I'd certainly agree with that, but he sees it as he's fleecing the company for what he can get out of it. Like, he'd go to a pride parade anyway, but the fact that his company is willing to sponsor a float for him to actually be on the float and pride parade, he sees like he's getting something out of it.
I suppose, kind of like, if the company's going to do the shitty thing for the sake of making more sales and, kind of crapping all over it in a bit of a way, might as well, take the wins where you can.
He's taking the free advertisement, kind of.
I think it's also worth noting as well that I think, what does they say? Gay men are the new straight white men, in the sense that because homosexuality is no longer seen as something to be like the other now. They basically are seen as having the same privilege as the rest of us, and a lot of them, the only difference that they had with the rest of society was that they were gay. So they might have had the same economic views as, say, the Liberals. As a matter of fact, the Liberal Party is quite accepting of gay people these days. So there's no reason. believe in all of that, to hold to all of that sort of thing and be, pro-corporate and also be gay, because they no longer have to choose.
You just reminded me of something I read the other day on Twitter, and I won't be able to find it now. I just had a quick look, and it wasn't there. It was in like the news page, and this will rustle some feathers, but it was it come up, and it was an article about how it was white gay privilege, how white gay people are more privileged than coloured gay people or LGBTQ people because they are not white.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's how
to me, it just
works.
seems like a combat of who's more oppressed. So it's like, no, I'm more the victim than you. But it did make me kind of facepalm a little. I obviously can't find it now, but it was it just seems like a left eats the left kind of story to me.
The left is good.
Off the back of that, given that, and trying to avoid getting too far off topic here, but I think we're going to a little bit. When it comes to privilege, it's not so much about having an advantage over someone else. It's about not having to deal with the absolute shit that other people have to deal with. For example, kind of goes back to the saying of how money can't buy you happiness, but it sure can make a lot of things that make you unhappy just kind of go away. Same thing with privilege. If you have a white name, for example, and this is a fairly well-studied phenomenon, if you have a white name, your resume is a certain percentage more likely to actually be read by an employer that you're applying to. Than
I
when you
met
have a
this
black
with
name.
I had that little guy I worked with in retail, Jono. His name was he went by AJ. I can't even remember how to say his name now, actually. But he went by AJ, and he changed it on his resume to just AJ, just for that reason, because when he was applying for work.
I think there's a certain amount of that as well, but actually, if I remember rightly, the study where they did that, they tested 4 different sets of names. There we are, 4. They had upper class white names, like upper middle class sort of white names. Then they had historically black names, like William Jefferson or something like that, like Edward Black. Names that they're common among legacy black families, but they don't represent what we consider as black culture necessarily. Then they had what we think of as stereotypically black names, your Tyrone. Actually, fun fact about that. You ever wonder why Tyrone is considered a black name? It's actually an Irish name. It's a name for an area in Ireland. And it's from when they actually tried to force breed black people and Irish people because they considered them both subhuman.
The more I learn about the history, the more I think that Ultron was right.
It's like that sometimes. So yeah, they had all of these. They had all of these what we would consider ghetto names, and no surprise, they were not considered as much. And then they had all of these classically trailer trash white names as well, like for example Mercedes or all of that sort of thing. And they found that those were not considered as well. It's not just a matter of race, although as you can see, that definitely does come up. It's also a matter of class.
Kind of comes to the question that's on a lot of political compasses about whether you think that people are ultimately more divided by class than by race. And I mean, generally, I think ultimately people are more divided by class than race, but mainly because the two correlate very, very closely together. Like
they do.
Like, I mean,
but
a black person is more likely to make below minimum wage than a white person. Well, not minimum wage, average wage, I should say. Mainly because if you look at the top 10 richest people on the planet, they are painstakingly white.
Are there a lot of, I don't have the list, but I thought there were a lot of quite rich you know, the United Arab Emirates was quite wealthy, but I don't know how that stacks up in comparison to like Wall Street in the US, to be honest.
I haven't looked into it that far. I'd imagine, I think a lot of them are quite wealthy, but I don't think it's really that comparable to the Elon Musks and Warren Buffetts of the world. Just because these people are obscenely wealthy. I mean, it's a bit of a meme in amongst leftist circles of playing the game where, can you spend all of rich person X's money? And it's kind of like, you're not allowed to spend it on stuff that's sole purpose is to make more money. You have to actually spend it on stuff that you would consume, like, you know, sports
Yachts.
cars and whatnot. And it's like, you just
I
you
can
can't
do
do
that.
it. But back onto Pride Month, because we did get a bit off it, and kind of to compare it to the war on Christmas a little bit, how, you know, in the way that people complain about, well, certain people complain, different people obviously complain about each of them, but certain people complain about how, oh, they're taking Christmas out of the shops and stuff. But there was a segment, it was a few years ago, I forget who it was, I think it was Bill O'Reilly, but don't quote me on that, interviewed a spiritual leader about, you know, how they're taking God out of Christmas and all that, and it was like, actually, I want them to do that. I don't like the commercialization of my religion. I see it a bit like that with Pride Month.
I agree.
It feels like a bit of a slap in the face to people, just the sheer commercialization of this social movement. A bit like it's been hijacked. I mean, the same corporations that go and put a pride flag over their logo are the same corporations who give massive donations to the Liberal National Party, push for, you know, plebiscites rather than just the politicians doing their job and voting it into law. They're the same corporations that try and do union busting, which, given that the majority of LGBT people are, you know, not in the top 1%, would benefit from unions, therefore union busting kind of hurts them a bit. I mean, it feels like a bit of a slap in the face, like, hey, we're going to do all of this apparently progressive stuff, but none of the actual substantive stuff that will actually help you.
Well, here's something you might want to consider as well. Gay people are far more likely to be successful than stereotypically straight people, which means that they're going to be in a different socioeconomic class to the rest of us.
So they're not. My mind's going blank on the word. Oppressed.
Look, let's just straight up let's acknowledge it. Gay people have had to wade through, pardon my language, shit to get to where they are now.
Agreed.
They have, you know, back in the 70s, they had to fight the police. Pride parades started not as a, hey, look at us and we're celebrating being gay and everything. Like, we exist. Existence was rebellion to them. Like, that's how it started. Like, pride parades ended in violence, them against law enforcement, so they could fight for their right to be. That's what it started out as. And yeah, nowadays it's basically all these companies getting in on pride parades, and like, be honest, guys, you would have oppressed gay people back in the 70s when all of this is happening, and then now you're just getting onto it and saying, oh, I'm gonna pretend like nothing's happened. Like, society in some respect needs to accept its culpability in the mistreatment of gay people, the abandonment of gay men during the AIDS epidemic.
I think it would go. I'd argue it goes further than abandonment. I'd say it was outright, like, intentional oppression. I mean, AIDS was considered to be something that only gay men could get, and they were vilified for, you know, no fault of their own. I have a hunch that everyone everyone here agrees with me on this, but your sexual inclination is not something you can choose. And for anyone watching that wants to challenge me on that, ask yourself this. I'm going to assume that you're straight, because if you challenge me on that, there is a good chance that you are. When did you choose to be straight? Just think about that for a moment.
And furthermore, if you could choose not to be gay, why would you choose to be gay in a society that doesn't accept you?
I've just found, in the background, I looked up Pride Month, and I have actually found an interesting article about EA that their staff have staged a walkout to protest because EA chose to rainbow wash, as they say, their logo, but they did not submit or release, they did not publish they threatened to walk out unless the publisher took a substantial action to support Pride Month. So they did the rainbow logo, but they didn't publish a statement supporting it. So their staff have staged a walkout protest because they didn't actually say they supported it.
See, I would argue that just putting the pride flag over your logo and making a statement, that's not substantive. I don't think that making a statement, gay people exist and they should be allowed to be, like, to me that seems like something that's like, it's such a non-statement. It's not funny.
No.
It's like water is red, the sky is blue.
EA staff believe that rainbow washing the EA logo after openly refusing to issue a statement of support is nothing more than a hypocritical marketing ploy and not genuine supporting effort. Why do you need a games company to support? I don't know.
Well, I mean, EA is the most evil, real or fictional company ever created.
I think
the list goes like
I
this.
think part of me is like, do these people have nothing better to do?
I mean,
it seems like that to me such a small issue that really wouldn't bother me.
Let's talk about computer game companies doing real justice, though. What is real justice? Putting up a rainbow version of your logo, or dealing with crunch culture that has people working 16, 18 hours a day up until release, possibly for months at a time. Does that so the price of games hasn't increased in 20 years. A AAA game will set you back about $100 or $90 or so. If anything, it's decreased, which you wouldn't expect with inflation. The only reason why prices have been able to stay as steady as they are is because the game companies have been able to expand into different markets, and digital distribution overheads are next to nothing. So
and they're selling you a demo.
Yes,
they're selling you a beta test,
especially EA.
Yeah, so
I'm also looking at CD Projekt Red on that one.
Yeah, look, we want to think they're a good company, but they are not.
Look,
and that's
trying not to get too much off topic, but just a quick comment off that before it skipped out of my mind. I find the whole cyberpunk thing incredibly ironic, that a game that's entire aesthetic is rebellion against corporate overlords was ruined by corporate overlords trying to push it out before it was ready. I just want to appreciate the irony in that for a moment.
I mean, if we were honest about the way we consume entertainment, we should be paying more for games than we are. And if we did that, maybe they'd be able to hire more developers, and maybe the developers wouldn't have to do crunch culture, and maybe our developers could have better quality of life whether they're gay or straight, because while these companies are throwing up rainbow versions of their logos, they're oppressing all of their employees.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, we let it happen.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, I don't buy AAA games on release anymore because they're just not finished at that point in time. I'm willing to wait 6 months.
Same.
Byproduct of that is the prices usually drop down to about $60 at that point.
And you find out if it's actually a good game.
And you get to find out if it's a good game ahead of time. But, I mean, it's me making my tiny little contribution to tell these, massive corporations, hey, I want you to finish the game before I'm willing to buy it. Obviously, it makes such a minor impact because everyone's still going to buy the game at release.
Just a reminder, people, don't pre-order. Unless you're me and Age of Empires 4 is coming out and you got the hype bug bad.
Look, they're digitally distributed. They're not going to run out of copies. There's no need to pre-order. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like a bit of a slap in the face to, and going beyond just Pride Month, anytime a corporation does, a socially progressive thing, while simultaneously, over here on the side, doing absolutely shit thing to 80% of the population. Although, Tom, you've been awfully quiet during this discussion. Would you like to chime in?
It's probably because of my lack of care for this subject. This whole side of politics, where it's identity politics and all that kind of stuff, I see it as the least important part of politics. And when it comes to corporations getting involved in it, it's just natural marketing that you've got to expect them to do. I just don't care about it. It's stupid and hypocritical, and it works to convince some people to buy their product, and it pisses off a lot of people, and I'm happy for it to do that either way. They've always done it. They're always going to do it. I don't see it as something that could change, because it's not smart to not go along with fads like that as a corporation, because you will get excluded from the market pretty quickly. I don't have much else to say on it.
Fair. I think we've
fair point. If you're running a big corporation, a business, your entire business model is to probably return profit for your shareholders.
Well,
do you do it even if you disagree with it, or do you by doing it you get a little bit of attention, you get left alone, but the moment you don't do it, you're going to get that pressure to do it, to rainbow wash your logo.
Yeah.
Oh,
let's make a bigger thing of it.
Let's talk about the places in the world where they don't rainbow wash their logo.
Saudi Arabia. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm going to assume they probably don't do it there.
Well, sorry, where did you say?
Saudi Arabia. Just a hunch, they probably don't do it there.
Don't think they want to get thrown off the rooftop.
Wait, was it Japan or China where they changed the Star Wars and the Black Panther thing?
I think that was China.
China, yeah. I'm feeling maybe that.
Having said that, Disney's getting a little bit better. Apparently Lightyear, or someone might want to look this up, but Lightyear was apparently banned in China because it featured a gay couple in the background or something like that. So at least they're actually standing up for their principles these days. But in the past, they've been more than willing to sell out their principles in order to appease the Chinese market.
There is a lot of articles coming up on Google when I Google Lightyear banned in China for LGBT themes.
There you go.
So, I mean, there's the thing, how much financial ties are there between Disney and the Chinese government, and how willing are they to cut those ties to do something substantially in favour of LGBT community?
Well, they certainly are putting their money where their mouth is, and I think that's more than a lot of companies have done.
I suppose. I mean, it's a long way given that, Walt Disney was a massive anti-Semite, so not exactly the most progressive person on the planet.
Could be because they have a lot of money.
Look, you just got to give credit where credit's due.
This is true. Disney does have a lot of money. Fun. Anyone else have anything they want to add before we move on? No? Cool. We will move on. Look, we're just going to go down the list top to bottom. So let's talk about French subs. So a bit of background on this. It was like, what, 800 and something million dollars that the 3-week-old Labour government that we have here in Australia has had to pay to a French submarine manufacturing firm for a contract that the previous administration broke.
Did you say 300 million?
I thought it was either 80 or 800 and something.
Oh, okay,
835 million.
There we go. 800 and
That's
something.
pocket change.
That is pocket change.
I did think that too. It's not a lot.
Actually, I'm curious.
835 million in French submarine contract with the naval group as a cancelled contract. So there was a $90 billion contract.
Got to earn that pretty good.
Yeah.
So that is a fairly tiny break fee when you think about it.
But having said that, like, if you don't mind me nerding out about subs for a bit.
Let's nerd about some. That's fun.
Okay, so what's changing subs actually is in Australia? It's a massive reorganisation of what our defence forces are going to do. Diesel subs are better for short-range operations, and they're also quieter. They're more stealthy than the nuclear subs.
Yep.
That's surprising.
Well, yeah, they run on. They generate up the top, then they dive, and they run on battery power.
Oh, okay, yeah, now I think about it more, that does actually make sense. They'd have to be up the top to be able to run the diesel generators anyway, so they'd have to be a diesel-electric hybrid.
So yeah, that's basically how they run it, and they perform better in tactical considerations than nuclear subs do. The difference that nuclear subs have is they can run underwater for months at a time, and that's the reason why the Americans have nuclear subs, because it's part of their nuclear deterrent. They can keep those subs under, and basically you don't know where they are, you don't know when they're going to pop up and nuke the place. They can, they can basically rain, like, they cannot be interdicted. If you fire nukes at the States will fire nukes at you. It's really interesting that Australia is looking to getting nuclear subs, because we don't have nuclear weapons, of course.
Yeah.
So what does this imply? It implies that our subs are going to be doing long-range missions far from home, where previously they might not have done that. It's going to be really interesting to see where we go from here, because where are we most likely to do those missions?
I'm not sure you could really. I think it's a little bit of a jump to say that because we've ordered these subs, that we are going to be doing long range missions. I definitely agree that we'd have the potential to, but just off of that information, I don't think it's quite fair to say that jumping to saying we are is skipping over a couple of facts that you would need to be able to demonstrate first.
Perhaps it's better to say that the Americans perceive us as being capable of running those missions.
I can agree with you on that one. Sorry, I when it comes to that sort of thing, I love nitpicking it, as David knows, and I have pissed him off so many times with it.
Just tactically, it didn't make sense for us to be getting that kind of submarine for our military strategy. Even if we're working with the United States, we would have been better off with the diesel subs. We're not going to really gain anything from it. It's exactly the same situation as the new jets that we ordered and received recently. That we knew that they were going to be terrible for what we intend to use it for long before we even ordered, and we should have got something far different in their place. But for some reason, we just keep making these weird military decisions that end up giving a lot of money to the US.
It's almost as if our military decisions are being heavily influenced by companies that make weapons or something.
Yeah. Strange.
Almost as if there's a complex relationship between military and industry.
I mean,
it's kind of like there's a conflict of interest in the people that are making these decisions.
I have a bit of a conflict of interest. I went to see those jets when they got here, and I thought they were awesome, and still do, but we don't need them.
Oh, look, it's not nearly as bad as ordering all of those tanks. I mean, we're an island. What do we need tanks for? How are tanks going to be useful for defending our borders? I mean, sure, once if we were already invaded and then we trying to hold a line on land, then I can see use for them. But by the time you actually are in a situation where they'd be useful, we've already lost.
Nah, bro, it's for when we do peacekeeping. It's for when we're doing peacekeeping operations in Guangdong province.
Oh right, sorry, forgot about the peacekeeping operations we've got to do.
I used to know someone that was actually a tank operator in the army for Australia, and he never once did anything with it. He said they just don't get used, so we don't need new ones.
Shame. That'd be a cool job to have.
But while we're begging the military-industrial complex for new things, can I make a kind request to any Australian military policymakers that might be listening to this? Can we switch to the NGSW like the Americans have? I love the idea of 6.8.
I have no idea what any of that means.
Okay, sorry, I should explain. The American Army has recently switched up their main battle rifle to the from the M4A1 to it's a SIG MCX Spear, I think it is. It uses 6.8 ammunition as opposed to 5.56. It's got far more power. It's a bigger round. It's designed to defeat body armor.
That'd be useful if the people you're shooting at have body armor.
Which implies that they intend to, or they reasonably foresee going to war with people who have body armor, like the Chinese.
Or they're just trying to beat the war drums to try to look tough.
Well, you know what the old saying is: if you want peace, prepare for war.
I thought the old saying was peace meant having a bigger stick than the other guy, and it's always the guy selling the sticks that says that.
Not wrong, but I'm nerding out about military hardware.
But back on the subs thing, the main concern that I see with it, and I'm not overly familiar with military strategy in the real world. Come to military strategy on the tabletop with Warhammer, all over that shit. But the main concern I can see is we don't really have a lot of, how do I put this nicely, capacity to refine uranium in Australia. So having, the things that are meant to defend the island that is Australia run on enriched uranium, probably not the best idea when we don't really have the facilities to produce it quickly. It kind of ties us into being extremely reliant on the US and puts our ability to negotiate them, gives the US power over us, basically. Because not only do we then rely on them for a defense pact to help us defend our shores,
does the US not have power over us anyway?
Well, it just compounds to that issue.
If you believe what Shanks says about the Whitlam conspiracy, then it's not like this is old news. It's not like this is news.
I just think it makes a bad problem
hopefully, Jono,
worse.
from that perhaps we become a bit more self-sufficient in refining uranium for nuclear power.
I agree that we probably should, but I don't see it ever happening.
Maybe it's the only way they'll actually get nuclear power happening in Australia, because obviously it's uneconomical to do it at this point because technology for renewables has advanced so much. The only way they could justify doing it is if the government's willing to drop a whole lot of money on it.
I don't think we'll ever get nuclear power in terms of nuclear power stations, but we could refine uranium here and sell it.
Well, I think off the back of
the new coal.
Off the back of that, I don't think that we should be selling any minerals that are not processed. Like, we ship tons and tons and tons of iron ore off to everywhere. Why don't we process that, at the very least, process it into actual iron before shipping it?
Well, it depends what people need it for, I guess. But I definitely see your point. And obviously we should be working more towards secondary industry rather than just primary industry, education and housing as the only three industries we actually have in Australia.
I mean, it's kind of like with, the live export debate. My issue with it is not so much that, we risk being cruel to animals because they then go to these countries that don't have the same animal rights regulations we have. But it just seems really inefficient. And like we're just leaving export dollars on the table.
No one
Yeah,
expects.
I get what you mean, Jono, but I also think it is inefficient in a way that we probably could make more money by refining it ourselves, but it is also more efficient in we don't have to do it. We just sell it. We just dig it and sell it, you know?
Yeah, putting it
losing
building a refinery.
Well, I mean, when it
Yeah,
comes
the
to
whole
stuff,
industry we don't
when it
have.
comes to stuff that you dig out of the ground, there's only a finite amount of it there, and once it's gone, it's gone. So by refining it ourselves and then selling the refined product, we can then drag out over a longer term drag out how that. Sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. Drag out how productive the amount of time that asset can remain productive for. Because once
then you run the risk of of course you're gonna need manufacturing sector for that, and then what are you gonna do? All your workers gonna be unionized. Big business can't have that.
No, we can't have unions. That would be just terrible if people had basic minimum, rights at work. Can't have.
Sorry, I got us off topic.
But yeah, I mean,
Going
back to the French subs, the whole thing's just an absolute clusterfuck. It's a lack of planning on behalf of our government, and it just goes to show that the Liberal Party are a bunch of corrupt dickheads.
So, I don't disagree with the final assertion. But I will suggest that there's possibly a good rationale for us doing this, in the sense that obviously closer ties with America, and also one thing that has never been mentioned in the sub deal with the Americans is the fact they also gave us cruise missiles that allow us to hit Chinese shipping, cutting off their economy because they're dependent on all their energy from the Middle East. If we can cut off their energy supplies at the Straits of Malacca and around Singapore, what are they going to do about it?
Did you say China?
Yeah.
Didn't we already do that by stopping selling them coal or something?
Yeah, and that hurt
stopped
them
taking
really
it.
badly because they had to
That
buy.
hurt it. Yeah. That was the argument between them and our coal, and then they were like, no, we're not buying, and then they wouldn't let the ships port, and they had all the rolling blackouts because they didn't have enough coal, and there were 12 Australian ships there full of coal.
Whoa, David, slow down. I think you're missing the fact that coal is the only reliable and cheap energy source that there is. Didn't you know this? Sky News says it all the time.
It won't hurt you.
It won't hurt you. You just have to make sure that you cover it in lacquer before you bring it into Parliament.
But yeah, so going on with this, the Chinese have been standing over us fairly hard about us, doing the whole thing about, hey, where did COVID come from? You notice after we did that deal, they haven't done that to us anymore, because now we have the possibility to hit them where it really hurts.
Yeah.
Like that. Like if there's anything their boycotts of our coal have shown, they're really vulnerable to losing energy sources.
Well, given just how globalized, economic trade is at the moment, where there is no country on earth that is actually self-sufficient, and
unfortunately,
when it comes to trying to get a country to stop being a dickhead, economic sanctions are more powerful than any army. Because you want China to stop being just the worst, cut off their access to iron ore and whatnot, coal, whatever, and they'll stop being a dickhead about whatever you want just to get that back. Or the other thing, they'll just make their populace suffer because it's an autocratic dictatorship.
Well, yeah, there's that too. I think China knows the writing's on the wall for them. They used to gain legitimacy from giving better living standards to their people, but now they're starting to realise those living standards aren't going to improve any higher than they already have, and they're facing an aging population that their people are going to have to look after their parents, because there's only one of them to do that. The Chinese government knows that the good times are over.
Well,
and now they're clamping down on that because they know it's going to get worse, and the people need to respect them, not because of the living standards, but because of the raw power.
Well, on top of that, I mean, another fun result of the one-child policy, not just that you have one child now having to take care of two parents that are elderly, but it really sucks to be a male in China at the moment, unless you are wealthy and attractive, because, what is it? I think it's like 4 or 5 to 1 is the male to female ratio.
It's I think it's 56 to 50. I think
I'm googling it now. Oh, Jesus Christ! Oh wait, no, I misread that. It's not as bad as I thought. I was about to say, is that 105 to 1? No, it's 105 to 100.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I was thinking that does not sound right.
But extrapolate that up to the astronomical numbers that China has. That's a lot of guys that are going to have to find a wife from somewhere else.
Or, you know, get some corporate LGBT gay washing.
Aren't they all just investing in those like virtual girlfriends or something now?
I thought that was a Japanese.
I thought that was more of a Japanese thing.
I think that's where it comes from, but their main market is China.
Oh, don't say that too loud. The Chinese and Japanese do not get along. When I was at uni, some of my housemates were Chinese, and due to the, you know, bad blood from all the wars that they've had, it's kind of like the Asian equivalent of England and France.
Yeah.
If you ask the Japanese, nothing happened in Nanking in 1936.
Fair call.
And if you ask the Chinese, nothing happened at Tiananmen Square in 1989.
Look, nothing happened in Taiwan in 2024. Sorry, what? Anyway, where were we? Right, French subs. Look, the one good thing to come out of cutting the French sub deal is at least we know that we'll have subs that will not just surrender as soon as they see an enemy. Sorry.
For a moment there, I was worried we were approaching based overload, and I thought you headed it off. But no, we've just been hitting levels of base that shouldn't even be possible.
We have crossed over the base Rubicon. But look, all jokes aside, cutting the French sub deal was a stupid idea to start with. Bad Liberal Party. It's almost as if there's a shitload of corruption there, but also the Liberal Party are not corrupt. There is no need for a federal ICAC at all. And they're great economic managers, so of course they make the right choices when it comes to ordering weapons of war.
Neither are we making assertions about specific Liberal politicians. Neither are we relying on stuff that is under parliamentary privilege.
Yeah,
And
look,
on that bombshell,
as the Friendly Geordie's
I'm
case
not
showed,
intended.
do not rely on stuff under parliamentary. Look, that's an excellent subway. An excellent subway. We talk about stuff. An excellent segue into everyone's favorite topic, Bruz v Google, which I hope you've all looked that up by now. Basically, a former New South Wales politician who I will not name on risk, as I do not feel like getting sued, and they are very sue happy.
Or visited by the Fixated Persons Unit. Let's not forget that.
Look, there is a very good chance that Terror Police will burst through the door any second now. Probably David's door, actually. That seems more likely. He is the filthy centrist of the group.
Rat him out. That's all David's idea.
But basically, despite the fact that Bruz... Actually, I've got to stop calling him that. He really fucking hates it, and he's going to sue me if I keep saying it. despite the fact that John Barilaro dropped the case against Friendly Geordies, he actually won against Google because they did not take the Geordies videos down. Which kind of brings into question, if he had continued with the case against Geordies, do we think he would have won? Because
it's highly possible that he would have.
He won against Google. And surely Google have good lawyers.
They didn't take it as seriously as they should have, and didn't want to put the extra effort in when they realised it was a bit too late.
Tell us more about that.
I don't have much more about that to say.
Fair enough.
David, your mute button's on.
That's weird. My headset sounds like I'm not muted. I suspect he would not have won against Friendly Geordies because he was obviously proving things that he had said were true, and that's why I think John Barilaro, stopped the case because he didn't want to lose, so he decided to pull out of that. However, I think the case against Google was more than likely like what Tom said. It's a bigger company. They probably put less effort in. You know, he's been awarded $700,000, which for Google, that's like SFA. Like that
I'm
is
fairly sure
nothing
Google
for
made
Google.
that much in profit since the beginning of this podcast. So
Exactly. Like Google,
Okay,
Google do not care.
Conspiracy time. Shanks and Barilaro, they planned this out together so they could fleece Google.
look, I'd like to
and
point.
and he's
I'd
gonna
like
he's
to just
gonna
remind
pork
you that
barrel
this
a
is
bit of
being
fun
streamed
back,
to a Google platform, so
and he's gonna pork barrel some funds back to Shanks' account.
pork Barilaro.
And he'll talk about it under parliamentary privilege so he can't get in trouble for it.
Oh, parliamentary privilege is such a bunch of wank. I mean, it should not exist. If something that you should be, if you're allowed to say it in Parliament, then it should be allowed to be brought up in court. Politicians have way too much protection in this country. They need to be brought down a peg or 2,000.
So I'm just going to bring up I'm just going to do some looking up of exactly the purpose of parliamentary privilege. Give me a moment.
While you're doing that, I don't know if any of you heard Friendly Geordies talk about the court case on Isaac Butterfield's podcast. And it's actually really funny. He talks about how he thinks the court system is really good. We're really great. We're really lucky to have it. That someone can fight. But then he said like it is so retarded because he said we've had conversations about when we're going to have a conversation, about having a conversation to plan to have an argument, and then we'll argue about when we're going to have that argument. Is basically the court process.
Did they make sure that they booked the meeting to discuss when they were going to have the argument about when they were going to have the argument?
Yeah, he said that's pretty much what just happens over and over.
If you ever watch any kind of live footage from Parliament, it's the same thing. They just argue over arguing, and when they get the chance to talk and how much time they get to talk and all that. It's a waste of time, most of it. But...
So I'm just looking up the origins of parliamentary privilege. So parliamentary privilege apparently only applies to things like slander, contempt of court, or breaching the Official Secrets Act. So it does not make them immune to arrest on criminal grounds, nor does it entirely extend to Scotland, Wales. So basically, what it's saying is that you can say stuff about people and you can not be defamed for it. Although this is interesting because let's also consider the case of Lionhelm v. Hansen. Sarah Hansen suing David Lionhelm for defamation because he, for want of a better word, called her a loose woman. And
slut. The word you're looking for there is slut.
more or less. Uh, and he's due to go before the High Court, but 2 lower courts have already ruled in her favour, which is interesting. It seems to indicate that parliamentary privilege doesn't apply in matters of defamation between 2 parliament members in Parliament.
Only
Yet it
if you're a
seems to
YouTube comedian.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Either Lionhelm should have to pay up to Sarah Hanson Young for calling her a slut, or he doesn't have to do that, and the Shanks decision works. Honestly, if you're looking at parliamentary, I don't know where I was going with this. I lost myself for a bit, but yeah. Lionhelm was not able to claim parliamentary privilege for the things that he said, whereas Barilaro was. So I find that to be really interesting. But we'll see how this goes in the High Court. The simple fact of the matter is that Shanks and Barilaro have settled, and this case isn't going to go any further.
I mean, it kind of comes back onto the whole, and I know that this is David's just his favourite topic ever, but freedom of speech, and I think this is something that me and David do at the core agree on. I think it's just the nitty gritty details that we disagree on, but you should be allowed to, provided you're not calling for direct threats of violence against a politician, you should be allowed to criticise them for what they do in Parliament.
It's starting to sound very libertarian there. Don't care about defamation laws. You don't think that parliamentary privilege should be a thing.
Well, it's almost as if I think that the people who are ruling over us should be held to a higher standard than everyone else.
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be nice. On the same note, and just to piss off all the libertarians in the audience now, I also think that taxes should be a thing, and the wealthier you are, the more tax that you should pay to support people, so that there is a bare minimum for people, so that people aren't dying in a puddle of their own shit in the gutter.
I don't know why, but my butt's really starting to hurt right now. I can't explain it, it just happened.
But yeah, I mean, off the bat, getting a little bit off topic here, but something that did happen in the last couple of weeks was, and I'm sure David heard about this, but Butterfield got kicked off TikTok. David, would you like to share with everyone why Butterfield got kicked off TikTok? As I'm sure you know why.
Well, he actually mentioned it when I went and saw him live, and I think it was it he said men cannot have babies or something like that?
Yeah, so I saw his follow-up video on that.
I haven't seen that.
I did watch the follow-up video, because despite the fact that I disagree with him on a lot of things, and I don't find a lot of his humour terribly comedic, I am the kind of absolute dickhead that watches stuff just to have their blood boil. But he tried to justify his statements by saying nothing that he said was not true. And he was when he said men, he was referring, at least this is the way I understood it. And if Butterfield, you're watching this, hi. Also, if you could clarify whether you were referring, when you said men, if you were referring to men in the context of gender or men in the context of sex, because they, from a biological perspective, they're different. Sex is determined by your chromosomes, whether you're XY or XX, whereas gender is a neurochemical phenomenon. The two are generally closely correlated, but not necessarily. So, I mean, if he was talking about a biological man cannot have a baby, technically correct. But if he's talking gender, then he's not correct, because you could be biologically female, but your gender could be male.
Let's invoke, like, before we go any further, let's invoke Futurama and say technically correct is the best kind of correct.
Technically correct is the best kind of correct, and I think Butterfield needs to clarify what he was referring to.
I think you don't need to. I think the general form of speech, if I say, there's a man over there, you know what I'm talking about, Jono. You don't turn around to me and go, oh, do you mean sex or gender? No, the man over there. I think in general form of speech, you can figure that out.
I think in general, the male gender is only called male gender, or the masculine gender is only called a male gender because most of the time it's males that have that gender. But really, male is the sex, and that just the name kind of got used because it was a majority thing for the gender. But most people would mean sex when they say it, unless they're specifically talking about gender, and they'd highlight that first.
And I mean, I agree with you, David, that generally speaking, yes, you can work that out. And 99% of the time, you'll be fine using that methodology. However, when you have a massive audience, which I don't think anyone would disagree that Butterfield has a massive audience, and you go and say stuff and use language that can be interpreted that wishy-washily, and I mean, he was talking about gender in the video, is what I understood. Because he was talking about, and it was like a week ago, so I'm going off the top of my head, so if I apologise if I get it.
Well, luckily someone made a film about something very closely related to this.
I haven't watched that yet, but I want to.
I don't know that I want to watch it.
I do.
I think people that get upset over stuff like this, where it is wishy-washy, to the point that they're outraged, they deserve to be upset.
I don't think it. That's the thing. I don't think it is wishy-washy. I think there's, like what I said before, there's a general 99% of people know what the hell you're talking about. And there's this small sliver who interpret it as gender. And yeah, technically that is true. What Jono was saying, technically sex is sex, gender is gender. But the time you're talking about gender is so small that it's almost not even worth worrying about.
The thing is,
and I think that's what causes the thing. It causes the dispute and the controversy around it is when someone says men can't have babies, they are talking about that 99% case where sex men can't have children, physically have babies. But there's that very sliver of when you talk about this specific example of this specific gender, a biological female who is gender male can have a baby. Yes, that is the one, like the exception to the rule. That is not what people are talking about 99% of the time.
See, and that's where context is very important, because the context for this particular thing that Butterfield said was in relationship to a male gendered person having a baby. And it's very easy to interpret what he said as a transphobic attack on that person, because he's effectively saying that they're not a man because they can have a baby.
So what was his purpose for saying that? Was he
He's a comedian.
was he trying to deny them their self-expression, or was he...
I don't think he's enough of a dickhead to be trying to do that. I think he was trying... He's a comedian. He was trying to, do the whole edgy humour thing. And I think when it comes to marginalised groups like the LGBT community, I think that it's unwise to do that, as they're already demonised by a substantial proportion of the population, and it seems like just it's punching down is what it comes across as.
I was going to say, it doesn't hurt you if someone decides to identify as not the sex they were born as. There's no reason for you to take it out on that person, especially when the trans community has such high rates of mental unwellness and suicide. Like, there's no reason to make a bad situation even worse. I've got friends who are trans, and I have immense respect for them. I know that they're not trans-trenders. I know that's a pejorative term that's thrown around for people who get caught up in the thing, but I know that they've thought long and hard about this. They don't feel comfortable in the skin they were born in, and they've taken steps to feel more comfortable as they are now. And I respect them for that. There are things in the trans agenda that I don't agree with. I don't agree with teaching kids that are age 7 about sex. I don't think they're old enough for it. I know that causes issues with how do kids know what they are, all of that sort of thing. I think that's an issue we need to work through, but there's no reason why we can't show respect to transgender people who have been through quite a lot in order to figure out who they are and who they feel most comfortable being.
And I think it's fine to have a discussion about it. What's not fine, though, is to use marginalised groups as the punchline of your joke. And I don't know if you'd agree with me on this one.
Comedians have been joking about anything and everything for years. Go back to the 90s.
I don't have a problem with people punching you.
Just because they've been doing it for years doesn't make it right, though.
I'm perfectly okay with a comedian saying whatever. I think they should be allowed to joke about anything.
I think they should be allowed to joke about anything, but they have to accept that if they do make a joke that is punching down, if a significant portion of people or a company then turns around and says, "Go fuck yourself," and boots them off of their platform or whatever, they've got to accept that consequence.
Yeah, that's part of it. But in terms of punching down, it's a lot of the time people just don't get the sense of humour they have, and a lot of the time the joke is against themselves. Like what's his name, Jimmy Carr, constantly joking about rape, but the joke is that he's the bad person for viewing rape as a good thing. That's the whole joke, is he's the butt of it, not the rape victims.
And as a connoisseur of Jimmy Carr, may I add, he further supports this with repeated jokes about how he's an inconsiderate lover, how he's a terrible person in general. So when he makes these jokes about rape, you know that he's not actually marginalising rape victims. He's making jokes about how rapists are terrible people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
the majority of the time.
People
punch it down. That's what it is. It's exactly that, and people get all cranky about it because they just misinterpret it and don't see the funny side.
I think where it comes from, Jono, of people getting upset when they get kicked off, is saying something like men can't have babies is scientifically correct. Because, and I just did this in the background, just to compare, the definition of a man is an adult male person, according to dictionary.com. So I then went and checked, what's the definition of a male? A person bearing X and Y chromosomes and a pair of cell nuclei, and it's talking about chromosomes. So male is, by definition, normally X and Y chromosome, which is what a man is. So yes, gender is the other spectrum, to use the right word, of that, where the definition kind of shifts and flips, but most of the time people are talking about sex. And I think the thing that upsets them is they say that, and then they get the backlash of like, what you're saying, and it's like you're trying to change science and definitions and silence someone's opinion just because, but what they've said is biologically true.
See, and I agree with you there. The thing is, in this particular case, it was in the context where saying male is referring to gender.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the thing. That person's talking gender, and this person's talking sex, and that's what causes this. It's like when if I say men can't have babies, and someone who's trans hears me say that, their interpretation flips it to the other side, and then when they say yes they can, we're talking about two different definitions. It's like,
but in this particular,
it's like a religious argument all over.
In this particular case, is the thing that it was referring to an article about a trans man So a biological, so an XX individual having a baby. So because it's referring to that, the only logical place you can go is that he was saying that a trans man can't have a baby.
But that's where a person would flip it to, I guess, interpret that as when they read the word man, they think of XY.
I think he was more demonstrating that he disagrees with their use of the word male in that stuff.
I think that's what I'm trying to get to, I think.
I'm gonna annoy fans of the Buttsman here, but hey, while we're annoying,
that's okay.
people,
I already have.
To be honest, I don't find a lot of Isaac Butterfield's stuff all that funny. Like, I've watched him a bit, and I can sort of see where the appeal comes from. But he's like, haha, trans people exist. How funny, ridiculous, outrageous is that? And like his punchlines are, and this is a problem in Australian comedy in general. People just shout the punchline really loud and think that equals humor.
I actually think that a lot of his humor is actually more. And this might just be these are the videos that YouTube serves up to me because they know they're the ones that will upset me more. But I actually find that more of his humor is about vegans than trans people. I don't know, David. You watch more of his stuff than I do, most likely.
I think it's kind of
interesting. Does he talk about trans people or vegans more?
I don't think all the videos I see of him are about fat people.
He does like to rip on vegan gains and that, and people anyone who goes after him, he'll just go back. But he does it. It's pure. It's like what we said. It's pure marketing. When someone tries to cancel him, he'll just go after it because it's more clicks. You get controversy. It's
almost like anyone trying to cancel him has actually amplified him further, David.
He loves getting cancelled and blocked out. Or getting a news article written about him, though, I wouldn't. It's called cancelling, but those kind of things aren't really cancelling, are they? When they just write a news article about how horrible they are.
No, it's not cancelling at all, is it?
I find it interesting that I know Jono, like Friendly Geordies gets brought up. I actually don't find Friendly Geordies that funny. I know a lot of his videos aren't meant to be funny as such. They're kind of more informative, but his humor just like when he just yells at the microphone and
the Liberal government.
and I get the kind of humor to it, but it wears off after about 3 minutes in. Isaac Butterfield, I agree. I do get that sometimes a lot of his stuff to me it's almost like filler content. But there's always, and like I went and saw him live a few weeks ago, the stuff I like, it doesn't actually make me laugh. It's more, it shocks me with it's that type of thing where it's like, holy shit, he actually said that. You can't say that. And I don't want to repeat the joke, but there were jokes in there like just about stuff you don't joke about, like things like he made a joke about, I can't remember. I might get this. Is it the kid Tyrrell, the boy in the Spider-Man clothes who's missing?
Yeah.
I made a joke about that, and I couldn't remember the first name, and it was so messed up. But everyone's like, "Oh," and that's the kind of thing, as messed up as I am, I kind of like because it's that thing that you're like, "Holy shit!" You don't joke about that, but that's what. They're to me the best jokes because they always catch me off guard because he usually builds up to it and you think, oh, that was bad, and then he's like, yeah, you thought that was bad, you wait, and then usually he'll make a joke and you think, okay, that's the joke, and then he'll just flip like an undertone word and it's just like, holy shit, that was that's the stuff and maybe that's just different taste in humor.
I think when it comes to comedians getting cancelled, I think that's where their fan base, I think that's part of what upsets their fan base the most when people try and cancel comedians, because I don't think that they actually ever end up actually getting cancelled. They usually get amplified even more. But I think that what upsets their fan base the most is that what the comedian has said appeals to that person's sense of humor, and then the fan base of that comedian feels like by pointing out that what the comedian said is fucked up, you're saying that the fan base is fucked up. And then, people get emotional and do emotional things.
There's a really good podcast with Jimmy Carr talking about, when a joke's said, it's in the context of a theatre or whatever, and if you're not there, it's not the same. Yeah.
And I'll say a couple of things about Jimmy Carr too. I actually went to see one of his shows a couple of years ago. It was great, but he knows he actually tests where the line is for his audience. He does not cross that line, because he picked out people from the audience. One of them was a nurse that looked after mentally ill people, and he made a joke about or disabled people. I think it was. He made a joke about disabled people. The audience was just silent. He walked it back, and he didn't touch it again. Because as much as Jimmy Carr has a reputation for saying messed up stuff, he knows where he's really good at finding out where the audience is at, where the line's at, and he does not cross that line. Now, about comedians getting cancelled, it's almost as if conservative comedians have figured out how to use the oppression Olympics for their own gain. Oh, look at me! I'm being oppressed by the establishment. Aren't I so oppressed? And they're able to turn that into cachet the same way that so many others have been able to.
Yeah, which is kind of, comes back to my whole argument about how cancel culture is not really, because a lot of the more conservative comedians use cancel culture to cash in. So have they really been cancelled if they're, cashing in on it and saying these things intentionally with the goal of having outrage?
And their agents don't care. Their promotion agencies don't really care, because no one boycotts agents, no one boycotts promotional agencies, no one boycotts theatres. As long as these guys have people who are willing to go see their shows, then you cannot reasonably be cancelled as a conservative comedian if you say something heinous.
I think it also builds an attraction to it of, you're not supposed to listen to that person because and I think this happened many years ago with Jordan Peterson when he first kind of came up through everything. I kind of heard about him in the background. I just heard, I seen things about him, and it was all that negative press of this guy's, transphobic, anti-gay, all this stuff. I'm like, oh, he sounds like a douche. And I didn't really know who he was. And then I somehow watched him talking about Bill C-16, and I'm like, holy shit, he kind of makes sense. And then that kind of, it was a rabbit hole of everyone saying this person's bad. I'm going to go actually listen to that person. And now it's actually become if I hear someone say this person's a racist, transphobic, horrible person, that kind of draws my attention to go, well, what are they actually saying? I want to go listen to them now.
So what you're saying is maybe the cultural left have cried wolf one too many times.
Yeah, quite possible. I'd agree with that. The funny thing with Jordan Peterson and C-16 is that he became famous for C-16 and how he completely misunderstood what it actually did. Because if you listen to what he says about what it does, how people will be able to get thrown in jail for intentionally misgendering people, yada yada yada, all that C-16 did was that it included LGBT people in an already existing piece of anti-discrimination legislation. That's all it did.
I think from what I've seen of Peterson's things, his concern was the whole idea of neo-pronouns. He didn't want legislation to codify language before language had a chance to work itself out properly.
Yeah. He just didn't want the government, as he put, I think, compelled speech, trying to compel how we speak to each other. I don't think he cared so much about the whole trans issue as much. He obviously
respects people's pronouns if they ask in good faith.
The thing is, C-16 wasn't even about speech, really. It was, you're not allowed to discriminate against someone on, for example, a rental contract because they're trans.
Yeah, and that's
fair.
I don't think he would have cared about that in particular. It was just the speech aspect of it that everyone just blew up out of proportion, because up until that point he'd just been a clinical psychiatrist of note, but not someone particularly special.
I'm actually happy that you pointed out that he's a clinical psychologist and not a lawyer. So why is he interpreting law?
Well, we can get into that debate elsewhere, but like it's really interesting too. This has now turned into a Peterson discussion. He's associated with alt-right adjacent men, but if you actually read his books, he talks a lot more about the opportunities he's had to work with women and help to develop their assertiveness training, so that they can ask for promotions, all of that sort of thing. Like, he's passionate about young men, about steering them away from alt-right Nazism, all of that sort of thing, but he's actually done a lot of good work with young women. And on my shelf, I've actually got Beyond Order, and he's like, most of the stories are about how he's worked with women to help them overcome issues in their lives.
Yeah, being a psychiatrist, I think he worked in a predominantly female industry,
and women are more likely to seek help about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and just from listening to him talk, he isn't an overly masculine man. He gets up on stage and starts crying. He cries nearly every other podcast if you listen to it, when he starts talking
it's so
about
bloody
something.
terrible.
I know. Yeah, it's just so it's kind of interesting that he's painted as that very alt-right, masculine kind of or chauvinistic, I guess, character.
I think
you have to kill the dragon, which represents the primordial chaos in your life. Clean your room, man.
I think he gets painted as alt-right more because of
Can we
a few things that you've said that can be interpreted
that?
as being socially regressive, combined with his he presents a very individualistic worldview. The whole clean your room before you go and try and fix society. It's like, at the bottom line, no one is perfect, so the logical conclusion of the whole clean your room ideology is that society never improves, because everyone's too busy trying to fix themselves and they'll never be able to actually be perfect.
I think his thought is, if you fix yourself, imagine if everyone did that.
The thing is, you can't fix yourself.
Yes, but if you can fix one thing about yourself, or do one thing better, well, hell, that's better than nothing. It's like going to a gym. They say go and be fit, and people think that means I have to go to the gym five days a week. I have to eat perfectly. No, if you go to the gym one day a week and walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes, or just walk around your block, that's better than you were before. That's, I think, his thing is, small steps. If you can do that, and then if everyone did little steps like that, that would improve society as a whole, because he's trying to, I guess, speak to the individual and lift everyone up slowly.
Which is where he gets painted as being alt-right, because it is a very individualist approach to societal problems. And
since when did individualism become alt-right, though, as opposed to just the default position of Western liberalism?
When everything ran left.
I think it's
I'm memeing for Jono.
The thing is,
I'm
it's
probably pointing the wrong
individualism
way.
taken to 11 out of 10, and it gets very extreme just how individualistic his advice on stuff is.
I mean, perhaps that comes out of his perspective as a clinical psychologist who works with people on a one-on-one basis.
I mean, given that he works with people on a one-on-one basis,
Sure,
it's
yeah.
not at all surprising. But if you want to know why he gets painted as alt-right, it's because his very individualist ideology, it blends in with the alt-right a lot better than it blends in with, the socialist left.
Well, he's
definitely.
not
I see where you're going with that, but yeah, like he comes from a milieu where he sees people being responsible for both their own problem. Well, no, maybe not responsible for their problems, but responsible for their solutions. And he's worked with people to help them overcome their solutions. So naturally, he's inclined to think people can overcome their solutions if they're given the right guidance to do so. And in that respect, he's a social. He would have been a social democrat if he'd kept his mouth shut, in the sense that he believes in strong social structures for people, all of that sort of thing. By no means is he a libertarian. He believes in a social democracy as we have had in Australia and Canada for the last little while, a government that looks after people. I don't think he would feel comfortable in an American system where people are responsible for their own stuff. But like I say, he believes in that fundamental safety net. But when it comes to personal issues, he sees that people need to find their own solutions before other people can help them. They have to want to improve, because I think that's the axiom of clinical psychology, of counselling, all of that sort of thing. The individual has to want to improve before they can. Sorry, I talk too much.
God only helps those who help themselves.
Sort of thing.
Oh, look.
My girlfriend's in counselling. I hear a lot about this sort of stuff.
Let's steer away before we start talking about Peterson and his atheist Christianity.
You already lost me at clean your room.
We're already 20 minutes over. Did you want to wrap up there? And we'll save talking about rentals and how landlords are bastards next time? Or did we want to try to quickly cram in the rental discussion?
I reckon if we save it, we can probably get a little bit more data from the housing market. It's already starting to fall.
Excellent.
My rent went up last week. So.
All right. Well, look, we'll save that one for another time. And does anyone have anything else they want to add to the discussion before we wrap up for the evening? Or are we all talked
all
out,
good.
Tom?
I'm pretty good.
Nope. Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Leave how much of a Nazi we are all down. Look, just call us a Nazi in the comments section, or if you are a Nazi and you think that we're being too socialist, just call us communists as well. Either or, and if they can just kind of balance each other out, we'll all be Davids.
I can be a Jewish Nazi. I'll be in good company.
Too easy. Well, thank you for watching, everyone, and we will see you all, in 2 weeks' time when we do another one.